welcome to 1 of 200, the New Zealand politics and news podcast, which is currently on hiatus because Kyle is just too damn lazy to do the job anymore. My name's John, and I am doing the intro and the outro of today's episode. I am joined by three experts in respective fields, but there's been some news this week which concerns them, their lives, their rights. The plan is to have an episode of them talking about it and occasionally bullying me mercilessly. So, first we have Jen Shields, director of Qtopia and Christchurch's #1 great picker of places to have breakfast. Hello, Jen.
Kia ora. Yeah, good compliment. Thank you.
We're also joined by Simone, who is every opposition researcher's favorite podcaster. Hello,
That's
Simone.
true. That's true, John. Good morning. Although it's kind of afternoon now, which is quite rare for us, isn't it? No, am I not merciful? There'll be mercy in the bullying.
And we're also joined by Mia, who has spoken to us at the beginning of this podcast and explained that she is a young person, which has instantly terrified all of us old people who do these podcasts and don't watch Jimmy Beast videos.
Yeah, I'm 23. I'm resident Rainrock. I speak at protests sometimes. I don't know. I'm just here for the hell of it.
Okay, so what a week, huh?
Fuck. They just
Yeah,
keep coming.
Yeah, the years start coming and they do not, in fact, stop coming.
I like that we stopped the current events podcasts right before more stuff happened. It would be really good if Francis Fukuyama were right and history did end, but it doesn't end and it hasn't ended.
In many ways, Kyle is the Francis Fukuyama of the New Zealand left.
I'm always saying this. He's a sock dem.
He declared that politics was over for the winter, so he can go and hibernate in the Opportunities Party's leaflets nest that he's built. And unfortunately, those of us who actually live in the real world, sorry, Kyle, have to continue. So, who would like to start this conversation?
I like his hibernation, actually. The Kyle can slow down his heartbeat to only 20 beats per minute. There has been a bill that was a wild transition. There has been a bill. I actually want to hand this over to Jen Shields, who knows a lot more about this, and just kind of do a bit of a segue because I think it's good for us to actually get things factually correct most of the time on this podcast. That's what I'm hearing from the fans.
I love that I'm the one that's trusted to be factually correct. That's great. There are some people on the internet who would really heartily disagree with that characterization of me, but that's exactly what we're here to talk about.
Read a biology textbook, Jen. 101.
Yeah. On Wednesday this week, the legislation definition of woman and man amendment bill passed first reading, much to our country's shame. This is a very brief piece of legislation, maybe takes the award for briefest, most unbelievable fuck up of a piece of legislation to have ever existed, considering all of the flow-on effects to other pieces of legislation, because the bill almost in its entirely says that in New Zealand legislation, woman refers to adult human biological female and man refers to adult human biological male, and similarly for male and female, having incredibly hilarious flow-on effects in terms of things like fisheries legislation, setting rules for the size of adult human female biological lobster tails that you can take from the ocean, and maybe more worryingly, intersects with our age of majority legislation, which defines the age of majority as 20, and then immediately specifies that any use of the word adult in New Zealand legislation refers to someone over 20. So therefore, anyone under 20 in Aotearoa under this piece of legislation no longer has a biological sex. So thank you, New Zealand First, for making my job 1,000 times easier.
It's actually really woke. Everybody agender.
Okay. Maybe we should let them cook.
It is true. I mean, we talk about the silliness, and I think this is part of what Jean-Paul Sartre calls the kind of fascists' right to play, right? They don't have to believe in the meanings of words, and there is really just a political valence to what's going on here, because with respect to drafting, it makes no sense. This was written on the back of a napkin by Winston Peters when he was 10 drinks sober into something at a bar, because he's always sober and we never do defamation on the show. And it's quite concerning, I think, for the reason that there is a kind of show of power and incompetence, to me at least. and that there has been such this flip, because correct me if I'm wrong, Jen, but it was actually in New Zealand first kind of sign off under the previous Labour government, which had allowed the changing of people's birth certificates, right, with their gender on it, with their new name, rather than doing the whole rigmarole which people have overseas, where they have like a recognition certificate or some other such extra piece of paper. That was, I don't want to get it wrong, was that Tracy Martin or someone else?
Yeah, I don't even think it was necessarily their sign off. I think she led that work.
Mm. So that's an example where, yeah, we've seen this kind of turnaround. And I think it's important to pull this back a little bit and say that the puberty blockers, a number of other bills aren't, and pieces of secondary legislation and guidance aren't in isolation, shall we say. They exist within the context of rising fascism, both within the Anglosphere and also within kind of the European sphere of influence as well, generally speaking, in the kind of imperial domain of the world, right? And this is not to kind of dehumanize anybody who's at the sharp end of this, which includes, you know, people on this podcast, but it is a tactic, right? The intention is to try to drive these wedges and to divide and to try to, for want of a better word, for a lot of people, this becomes a kind of distraction, right? Which it isn't, because this has material effects on real human people, adult biological people and child biological people, right? You know, there will be serious harmful flow-on effects physically for a lot of people because of these attacks. Not to get too grisly about it, but yes. And I think it is worth noting that, yes, this is part of a kind of overall strategy by the far right, which has just become the right wing in a lot of our countries, a lot of the settler colonies, and within a lot of Europe as well, that this is a project to roll back a number of rights, including, despite whatever TERFs will tell you, women's rights. You know, this is not a government in New Zealand, for example, which cares about women's rights. They scrapped pay equity. They definitely don't. And don't let anybody tell you otherwise. So I think it's worth kind of seeing that within that broader scope without conceding the humanity of who this is going to affect, because it will, because people who are trans are human people and they have lives, except for furries. I love you guys.
Yeah, but it's really evident in the legislation itself, right? Like a bill that is purported to protect the safety and rights of women, you think they would have analysed the impacts of the bill enough for them to pick up on the fact that it would make access to abortion impossible for anyone under 20 because of how it intersects with our abortion reform legislation. Like these people are they're not serious about it, but they are in that they're not obviously not serious about protecting women. They are serious about the actual intent of the bill, which is creating that division, increasing social cohesion, and using trans people and our lives and worsening those lives as the mechanism to do that. We get the worst of both worlds. We both get to suffer like worsening social cohesion because of the way that our needs and experiences and lives have been created or used as a wedge to drive that division further. So we have to live in a fucked world and get the blame for it at the same time.
Where have we seen that before, right? Yeah, me, I did want to turn to you as a kind of young person and as somebody who is in activist spaces and undertakes some of that organizing work. From your perspective, what is this bill and what does that kind of mean?
So this one's interesting because I would actually like I didn't know that this wouldn't allow people under the age of 20 to access abortion. That's horrific. I didn't know that was a thing. My understanding of this bill, and please again correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm unfortunately not always the most like aware of everything. I'm not super familiar with the legal system in the way that some of our wonderful other scholars are. But my understanding is that this is a bit of a nothing burger. Right, you guys have heard the term nothing burger, right? Okay, beautiful. If I say any slang that you guys don't know, please, I can clarify.
That one's a
But
millennial
I,
special. You don't get to claim that
is
one.
it?
Six,
I'm sorry.
seven.
Okay, my bad.
So
You can tell
old.
because it's twee.
Um, but anyways, my understanding was that this is a nothing burger bill that is more about posturing to a far right audience and about kind of like building a legal framework for discriminating against trans people rather than any meaningful impacts on us right now, if that makes sense. And so it's I volunteer for Rainbow Youth. I had my youth group last night. Was today Saturday? Yes, last night. And it was I had kids coming in crying, and like it's again, like I tried to kind of talk them through what might happen and what can be done about it, and reassure them. But it's just I'm seeing so much despair from everyone my age because we just keep seeing more and more transphobic, racist, sexist, homophobic, ableist laws, just bigoted in a million different ways, be proposed and passed. And I think my generation feels very doomer in that there's nothing we can do about it. It seems we just kind of cooked. We sit here and we watch as the boomers get all of their property values and all of their stock values and all their housing that we'll never get to access, while we just get slowly discriminated against and marginalized and turned against each other, is I think how my generation sees it.
Yeah, you're so right. The way that our human rights legislation is set up, the terms male and female, man and woman aren't in the Human Rights Act, that the terms sex is. And that's where, our protection from discrimination comes from legally. So you're so right. On paper, this bill doesn't do what it says it will do and doesn't have any like immediate clear legal effects for us purely because of how 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 unbelievably useless in the way that it's been drafted. Like what it will do is create a huge amount of legal uncertainty in terms of how the courts interpret that law. And I think what you've nailed there is like, because I've seen it in the community already, hearing from people who are supporting their friends in crisis because of the bill passing first reading. And so much of it, the intent, I think, is that posturing and in some ways kind of relying on the obscurity of the legal framework as to where our protection in terms of the human rights comes from. People are scared, and it is really hard to give clear like advice about what might happen next because the bill itself is so vague and so messy, but it's definitely like a step further down a direction we don't want to be going in. And we've seen, we have the benefit of being able to see overseas as to how these things play out. And yeah, I think that's one of the other reasons why our communities are reacting to this bill so strongly already, is because we have that awareness of how bad shit is internationally, and know that, even though this is a huge, confusing, complicated fucking mess, we know where it is headed. We know what that is like for our friends overseas.
Maybe we should zoom out a little bit then and talk about something that's happened almost in parallel in the United Kingdom, which is in recent years really just gone down. I really led myself into the sentence. It's gone down the shitter in terms of trans rights, right? And rights for anybody who is not a man, essentially, while kind of doing this under the banner of proclaiming this is to do with women's rights and single sex rights, et cetera, the kind of all these transphobic talking points and discourses. And things keep getting worse and worse. There's almost a competition, I think, amongst the political class to see who can stick the boot in amongst this minority more. So you see these competitions between Keir Starmer and Wes Streeting and Andy Burnham about who can be the worst to trans people, and particularly to attack trans women. But obviously, anybody who is intersex, non-binary, a trans man, or otherwise in some way gender non-conforming is going to be caught up by all of this. And there is almost a kind of patronizing, insulting, kind of degendering component to the attacks on trans men in England. We have all of these TERFs saying, "Oh, come and be a woman. You're a baby machine." All that sort of stuff, irreversible damage. Just disgusting stuff. We've seen most recently, and I wanted to talk about this because it's happened so close to what's happened here in New Zealand, is this new guidance from the AHCR. Can you talk about that a little bit, Jen?
Yeah. So the UK's Equalities and Human Rights Commission, what you said, the EHCR, has been working on this updated draft guidance for, man, I just talked about how, obtuse our legal framework for human rights is. The UK's
Yeah.
is so much worse. So they've released guidance for services. So I've been trying to work my way through this morning. The law is the law, obviously, and then in the UK, on top of that sits specific guidance that the Human Rights Commission puts out for different sectors. So, organisations that provide services to communities, education, workplaces, each have their own separate guidance, and the guidance that has come out is for services, which contributes to how confusing this is already. Looking to essentially update guidance after the Scottish minister's Supreme Court ruling that really fucked with things in the UK, declaring, yeah, particularly around single sex spaces and this idea of biological sex. The updated guidance is meant to look to put that in practice. The way that it's being talked about is like so fucked because you have, on one hand, the media who are basically saying the guidance says everyone must exclude trans people. You have trans people looking through it and doing the analysis and trying to figure out where exactly it says you can and can't exclude trans people. And then you have the Labour Party talking about how horrible it is that trans people had to wait so long for this guidance to be delivered. We should get better at telling trans people they can't exist in public life faster, is the
Yeah,
takeaway for the Labour
yeah.
Party there. But some of the headlines from this updated guidance is the fact that they consider that an organisation providing services that are sex specific and include trans women and cis women is discriminatory, inherently discriminatory. But if they provided services to trans women, cis women, and cis men, then it's fine. If they provide services to cis women and cis men, it's fine. It's just the trans woman that is the issue. And then, like you touched on, trans men are also facing more and more of the brunt of this in terms of how, I think, as a result of how often they have been an afterthought in TERF minds, other than trying to detransition them. The guidance now says that trans men can be legally excluded from single sex spaces, both men's and women's spaces, purely on the basis that some women may feel uncomfortable with a trans man in the space. So we're at the point in the UK now where someone's perceived discomfort is enough to legally exclude a trans person from an area of public life.
And it's perhaps worth interrogating a little bit that very obviously, if it is such a fundamental biological thing, there's no kind of social effect going on here. Why would it be that a cis woman might be uncomfortable with a trans man being in quote unquote his single sex space, right? And it's only because we have social gendered perceptions of people and bodies and the way that they present themselves and speech and attire and all of this, right? Like it's so clearly obvious that there's a total logical contradiction in every transphobe's worldview. But it doesn't matter because the whole point of this kind of fascism really is we have power. We can define reality at any moment. It doesn't matter if I said something different 5 seconds ago. This is the same reason why Trump is able to make the speeches that he is able to, why nothing has to be consistent, because there is only an ever shrinking in group and an out group which can be attacked for the satisfaction of the in group, right? It's this imposition of gendered hierarchy in a way which kind of intends to attempt to invite cis women into a higher gender hierarchy in the hopes that they will turn on anybody in the out group. But I think a lot of people see this as really weird and disturbing and off-putting. And the UK certainly can't speak for, and New Zealand, not to say it can't happen here, there could be concerted efforts. And I think that people mostly kind of go with the flow here. But a lot of people feel like New Zealand culture, particularly Pākehā culture, is a lot of like, I don't want to know, if that makes sense. We're not interested in, unless a politician brings it up, we're not particularly interested in their religion. It's not like in America where you have to have a wife on your arm and start talking about the church that you go to. Even Obama had to pretend to do that, right? This isn't something that we're particularly interested in. And a lot of people feel like it kind of doesn't matter. Now, there is very obviously still discrimination if you kind of, walk down the street, and there will always be shitty people. But I do think that this is something where people feel if it's being imposed or heavy-handed, they have a kind of rebound effect to it, right? They flinch at that. And this isn't popular politics at all. Perhaps I think it might be worth, not to assume that our audience is, not hashtag woke or anything like that, but it might be worth picking into what exactly doesn't make sense about a lot of this. Maybe we'll start with this idea of, this isn't in the bill, woman means an adult human biological female, and female means a human biological female. I mean, the definitions are tautological, right? That doesn't make sense to start off with. Secondly, legally in New Zealand, there's been a large movement in our legislation towards degendered language, just, person, right? Gender neutral language, because otherwise it doesn't make sense. Prior to that, of course, contrary to what transphobes would tell you, there wasn't this idea of, two sexes, man and woman, existing as this. We used the third person pronoun he to encompass all people because women were a kind of subset of men who were missing something. You can see this in Shakespeare, right? Much Ado About Nothing, the idea that having nothing is what, a cis woman's genitalia are, right? It's missing. You are missing the component of humanity that makes a man more human than you. Yeah. And women are kind of contained within that subset. So we see that these things change across time. But I want to attack this kind of concept of biological because it really doesn't make sense on any level. Trans women, unless they're like robot girls or something, are biological, right? And they are biological women. And they have the same, if they are, transitioning their sex, they have the same hormones as cis women do. It's just introduced externally, right? Downstream. So there's kind of this silly thing where the development of secondary sex characteristics is totally denied. There is almost a kind of, if I might say, a kind of gender creationism about this particular brand of transphobia, right? It is not only essentialized, it's essentialized in a way which suggests that there is just this platonic ideal which kind of pops into existence on Earth, and this is a cis woman, right? That there is no other process going on, and that transitioning sex characteristics isn't something which happens, which it does. This is materially true. This is just reality, right? There's a kind of nonsense to it. And that's part of what the attack is a kind of attack on reality, I think.
Yeah. And I think, through PETH's judicial review, obviously one of our central claims is that the puberty blocker ban is inherently discriminatory because it, is limiting access to healthcare for one population and not another. And in New Zealand's human rights framework, that discrimination under gender identity is protected under the grounds of sex. So this issue has been, relatively central to a lot of that work. So it's been really fascinating to, increase my own understanding around this and to talk to some of the experts like Ed Hyde, who's an OBGYN and a biology specialist who contributed some quotes to a Qtopia press release we released this week. And he put it really simply and so straightforwardly is that you can't there is no way to create a binary definition of biological sex because biological sex is not a binary. There is no definition you could create that would not unintentionally exclude some cisgender woman alongside transgender woman. It's totally impractical. And you're so right, Simone, like there's nothing about my body that isn't biological. This comes up in my work so much when we're talking to like in the healthcare sector. And even in healthcare, there's actually, I think, a relatively advanced understanding that sex is so much more than just like the static thing that happened to you once at birth and everyone's body is the same and identical after that. Like the kind of healthcare that I need and the reference ranges that people use for tests and a huge amount of so many aspects of medical care are not the same as for a cis man's because my body is not a cis man's because I'm not biologically male. Like it's totally nonsensical and is an entire social construction to try and claim that sex is naturally and inherently binary in a way that makes sense to be able to enshrine it in legislation. It's entirely unworkable.
And kind of peeling it back even from that, the fact that this has to be defined in legislation puts the lie to the fact that this is biological, right? Laws are something that we create socially amongst ourselves in order to govern a society, in order to have expectations about how we ought to treat one another if we don't have really close familial or village ties to them, right? This is a way of mitigating and mediating each other and conflict and a whole number of host of other kind of factors that come from human society arising, right? There is nothing biological about that except for that human people are doing it. We have these constructs of language itself being a technology that we use, right? There's something almost silly about it if it wasn't dangerous, this insistence of no, this is biology happening here. Because when transphobes use the term biology, what they really mean is a sociological category with political valence, and the political valence is tending toward genocide. That's what we're talking about here. The intention of drawing a circle around a particular kind of person with the intent to try to exclude other people is to eliminate and eradicate that group, which, not to freak out your youth group, Mia, I'm sorry, but like this is along the same wedge, right? It's just further along. And it behooves us, I think, in New Zealand not to sit back and say, well, this wouldn't happen here because we are different, because people are notably chill here. Well, perhaps the reason, the fact that we're chill actually makes political action more difficult in New Zealand because people are apathetic. There are all sorts of different sides of these coins, and we can't really rest on our laurels, I think. Not to say that anybody here is doing that, I don't think so. But I want to implore the listenership not to accept that just because things are like this here now, that they will always be like that. Think about how quickly this turned in England, and there are particular class components to that which are different. And there are other aspects of the polity in the United Kingdom which make that different, but it doesn't mean that there isn't an intent to move this toward a kind of genocidal political valence right here. And it's important for us to really think about what we're going to do to plan for when that same exact strategic plan of action unfolds here, because it has started. And we do have figures in the press, media figures who are essentially, for want of a better word, they are people who could ultimately hang at Nuremberg, right, about this. And we have to be very careful, and we have to be proactive, I think. And this is not an opening salvo, but it is one of the first, right? And like we were saying, it's a very small bill. It has, what is it? 1, 2, 3, 4, just principal stations, and then it's got 13A and 13B, and that's it. Less than a page, right? But it's kind of critical to really understand that the intent of this is to try to widen and push that agenda, the fascist agenda, by using trans people as a kind of minority that they intend to create and generate disgust and hate about. This is why you see genocidal language with transphobes, like discussion of trans bodies as being disgusting or mutilated, or in some way kind of taking medical language and using the exact flip side. Because one could use that about heart surgery, right? It is disgusting to look at, open heart surgery, but it's also life-saving. And this is what medication is for transgender people, much like for any other person who has or needs medication for any particular purpose, that this is life-saving medication, that puberty blockers as a compromise position certainly are a kind of backstop for mental health for young people, right? And it is exactly the incongruity which shows the project for what it is. Like you were just talking about Patha's court case over the puberty blocker ban, which says, well, cis children can be prescribed these if they have precocious puberty, so why can't trans children, right? And it is because the intent is discriminatory in this sense. I also want to highlight the fact that creating this kind of, or attempting to enshrine this nonsensical binaristic definition in law is an attack on intersex people in this country who exist and live lives and are adults and are biological and human.
I want to, if it's okay, I'd want to quickly jump back to what you're saying about my youth group, because I love my kids so much.
Sure.
I think they know what's going on. And I think I really implore people to listen to our youth and to listen to our trans youth. There's a reason I do the work I do, not just in that, but also in regards to like I did a lot of work with the puberty blocker ban stuff. which primarily was targeting our trans youth. They know they might not have the language necessarily to communicate it the same way that we do. Talking about like fascism and genocide and looking at historical examples. But they can look at what is going on around us, and it is so fucking cruel. Like I just want to, I don't know, I want to emphasize it is so heartbreaking to see the most autistic youth you've ever seen who should be talking about the new Five Nights at Freddy's movie and bullying me for being old, which is what their normal conversation topics. Oh yeah, you guys are like dust to them. They think I'm ancient. They think I knew Jesus. I told them my age the first time. They asked if I knew the dinosaurs. Um, that's Anyways, point being, they should be having. They're youths. They're fucking. The youngest kid we've got is they're like 13 years old. They should be having fun and talking about Five Nights at Freddy's and Minecraft and Roblox. They don't. It breaks my fucking heart to see them coming in sobbing about what's going on, and I just think like I don't know. I feel like there's a lot of like arguments about like the tactics and stuff like that. But I sometimes feel a bit odd about how divorced it gets from emotion, because like cruelty is the point of it all, and it is really when I think if the transphobes, this may be giving them too much credit and too much humanity, but I genuinely think if some of these people saw the effect that they were having on a bunch of young children, I don't know, like this, it didn't make sense in my brain, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense, but yeah.
Yeah, you have to hope that if they were confronted with the real human impact of what this is doing, that it would change their hearts. Yeah, I think you're so right. And I think I was thinking about what you were saying as well, Simone, in terms of how, I think in New Zealand we can be a bit more apathetic because we have this idea that, we're not as bad yet, or, we've got time, or it won't happen here. But I think in a lot of ways it is already here, right? Like just in my Facebook memories this week, cropped up that it is 2 years this week since Brian Tamaki was promoting an event with the slogan "Time to Kill," talking about trans people. Like the vibes in this country have been off for probably well over 5 years when it comes to trans people, in ways that our community have been noticing, and that I think in ways that our young people in the community notice as well. And I think that has an effect on the cis people in this country as well. If you are surrounded by a media environment, and thankfully we are not as bad as the UK yet. They were really averaging about 200 articles per month about trans people. The scale is not there. But I think a lot of the general public are sitting in this cultural, soup that is posing trans people as an issue. And I think, enough time exposed to that rots the brain. So I think we need to be acting now, because not necessarily to stop something from arriving, but to stop what we have already happening here from getting worse.
Yeah, absolutely. I think about exactly what you were talking about, Mia, a fair amount, because when we see, well, I think about Palestine, for example, which people have astutely pointed out is the paramount issue of our time because it encapsulates within itself every other horror, right? I think sometimes about Yahya Sinwar kind of being confronted in an interview about, well, why do you fight about this? Why aren't you a Gandhi? And him just immediately talking about how there are kids who live right next to the sea in Palestine and Gaza in particular who will never be able to swim in it, and they can't fish. They can see it every day and they can't swim in it. And I think there are a lot of trans youth who, when this gets worse and worse, will probably be in that exact position. You can see your peers doing things, but your world shrinks and it gets smaller and smaller. There might be almost too much credit to say that if transphobes saw that it would change their heart. I hope that for some it would. I hope.
I think that,
but,
I think that's a little optimistic of me, I fear. But I don't know. I'm Christian. I've got to believe in humanity, or I'll go crazy.
No, there are people who when they see like kind of suffering, that's the only thing which gives them any kind of spark or like impetus or stimulus, right? So it's the only thing that can make them feel alive is just inflicting cruelty. So, but sorry, what were you going to say?
I think our resident ally wants to speak. I could be wrong. Go on, talk, Valentina.
One of the things which often stops cis people from holding anti-trans, anti-intersex views is knowing somebody who is trans or intersex. It was the same with gays and lesbians. It's actually knowing someone and seeing that, oh, they're a person. They have to wash the dishes. They have to pay the mortgage. They want to live and love and look at butterflies and ride a bicycle and do all of these things that normal people do. However, for the very hardcore anti-trans movement, they cannot conceive of that because they do not see a human or a person. They see a problem which, as Simone has said, needs to be eliminated. And I this week wrote 122 emails. Some of them were funny, most of them weren't, to every MP. And a couple of the responses I got back, even from allies, was we don't want to get into a culture war. We don't want to add more fuel to the fire. To which I'd say, the culture war is here. The fire is burning, and it has been since the BDMR, which Tracy Martin started, and then she fucking stopped. And she gave the legislation to a panel and instructed them that they were not meant to recommend self-ID as a part of their deliberations. And that panel went and did it anyway. And then she just sat on it until her and New Zealand First got kicked out of Parliament. Then Jan Tinetti picked it up, and against a strong opposition from the same people who are wrong about homosexual law reform, civil unions, gay marriage, conversion therapy ban, she brought it home. The culture war started years ago. It didn't start when Emi Rakete lit up Annie O'Brien on Twitter. But for a lot of people, that was year zero. And that was nearly or over a decade ago. Okay? That was over a decade ago. We have been fighting this shit for over a decade now. And the idea that, oh, well, now that this bill has got to Parliament, I said it this morning, all of the previous bills have been about advancing the rights of our community. This is the first one which directly attempts to roll it back. And it is being supported by the people who fucking lost every other time, which means we know they can lose. We know that their ideas are unpopular. But it is incumbent on our politicians, even those who are allies, to say something about it, because everyone on this podcast today is going to be active. We are going to put in our free time and make it clear and get out there and talk to as many people as possible, right? But unless the political will is there, like as Simone has said, and as Mia has said, and as Jen has said, this has to get killed off, and it only gets killed off by concerted political and community effort. And at the minute, we know we've got the community effort. The political stuff, I look at the UK, I watch the Labour Party fold unprompted. I watched the SNP fold unprompted. It can happen here. It shouldn't, and we're going to do what we can to stop it. But it can happen here. And I will now go back to being the quiet cis guy.
I think about Defying Destiny, because you mentioned Emi Rakete, and there was both a total dropping of the ball by a lot of organizations that peeled off and said, no, 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 we can't stand up to Brian Tamaki, and Papa, as well as some other people came and said, no, no, fuck that. We actually have to stand up to these people because there are more of us, and did it. But what happened with Defying Destiny and afterwards was a lot of attacks by ostensibly left orgs and activist orgs against Papa and against others who were involved in Defying Destiny. I want to note that those people are cowards and that there is a war already going on. You just have to join the fight about it. To everybody who tries to draw on safetyism and say, oh, well, we don't want to put people directly in danger. That's not a co-papa. We don't want to, stir the pot, that sort of thing, right? You have to have a really safe protest. You have to do this and that the right way. Those things aren't working. And we know that we're being attacked extrajudicially and judicially and legislatively. So what are you going to do about it? Certainly don't turn on your comrades. Stop doing it.
Oh, resident young person here to speak again. I volunteered as a marshal for Defying Destiny, and I also volunteer for Kayafana. I don't want to speak on behalf of Papa or Kayafana because I'm just a little guy. I'm just a little guy who helped out sometimes. But there's this assumption that we are helpless, I think, when it comes to like these kind of conversations about safetyism. Like it's either like we do these completely safe protests, or it's all going to shit, right? Like it's a weird black and white thinking. There's a lot of good things you can do. There's a lot of good things you can do to be practical and be safe and to like engage in this kind of fight back while not endangering people. The team for the Define Destiny rally was incredible. We were on top of it the whole time. The team that we had for like the March for Humanity, last year, I think it was at Kayapana. Incredible team. We were on top of it the whole time. Destiny showed up. They couldn't do anything because we outnumbered them, right? There are things you can do about this. There are like tactics that you can use and organizations you can join, like Kayapana, if you are interested in safety. And it's not like I don't know. It's the language that is used as if like these are like going to become like violent mass murder events is frankly, I think, unrealistic to me and seemingly, I don't know, all it does is gives our opposition more power.
Sorry, could you explain what you mean by the last bit?
Like when we, sorry, yeah, the autism of it all, you know how it goes. I think like when we like seed this ground, when we say, oh, we can't do these rallies because they might be unsafe. When we say like, oh, there's nothing we can do to protect safety, who cares that Kayapana will show up to almost any rally if you contact them and you're like vaguely left wing. Who cares about all of this stuff? If you don't put any attempts, you don't put any attempts to marshal, you don't put any attempts to learn how to do any of this stuff, and you just kind of say, oh, we just won't do any of these protests. You're allowing the far right to do their protests, which often aren't as concerned with safety because they're all, in their minds, big scary men who will beat up um any leftists, any soy boys who show up. We are just giving them the power and the goodwill to go ahead with their protests, to go ahead with their events, to go ahead and do whatever they want, to say whatever they want, to intimidate people at Teatro Library, and assault some of my friends at Teatro Library to rally in support of Posey Parker and try to intimidate anyone else from showing up at these things. We're just giving them the power to run rampant with whatever they want to do and push this normalization of far right activities and events and rallies without any kind of backlash. And that is, I think, severely, severely damaging to our cause.
Yeah, exactly. You have to actually show up, and we have to have rallies and have to have counter protests, and we also have to be proactive, right? Like there has to be actual defense. Yeah, which is why I think it's critical to learn a lot of those skills, including things like de-arresting, for example, particularly when the police are set against us. So this is getting a little bit further off, I think, what the actual overall topic of the episode is about, but it is worth kind of considering what is next by looking at the playbook, perhaps about what's happened in the UK and what's happened in the United States, because there are strategic moves by a lot of these far right actors who are avatars of capital now, right? And that is ultimately what happens, that kind of fusion, that these extremist elements become fused with what is the interest of capital. And we have to have some kind of ability to meet that by understanding what's going to happen. And some of them are open about it, right? There is sometimes documentation in the United States. There's, for example, the 2025 project. Yeah, that was an example where people knew beforehand what was going to happen, not in every respect, but in some respects. And so it is worth being vigilant about a lot of those. I wondered if you had anything else that you wanted to add before we close out, Jen.
I think I spend so much time keeping too up to date on all the bad shit that's happening overseas, which is horrible for my mental health. But I know it's something that a lot of us do, right? Like it's really easy to keep up with the bad news. And we do it because it feels protective to kind of know what's happening and to feel like we're able to prepare. But I think it's also really important, and something I'm trying to do more of is like highlight the wins overseas as well. And I found it really interesting during the first reading this week, good old Genitalia Marcroft pointing out two different countries internationally where there had been legislative moves around this issue, one being the UK, which she obviously claimed as correct and right and the place that we should emulate because of their Supreme Court ruling, But she also referenced Australia, the Tickle versus Giggle Court of Appeal ruling that was handed down week before last, I think, which is an incredible success in a case of, if you're not familiar, quote unquote female only dating app discriminating against the trans woman who won the initial case under a cause of indirect discrimination and then was taken to appeal by the TERFs who lost the appeal and the charge was upgraded to direct discrimination. To my mind, there's no meaningful difference as to why between those two countries, why one is good, one is the other than the political agenda. But my point being is that what also happened in Australia this week is Pauline Hanson introduced essentially an identical bill to the definition of woman bill here and entirely failed. So there are places around the world where we can also look to for the benefit of not just knowing about the bad things that may happen, but the ways that people are succeeding at pushing back against this internationally. And I have also heard from people overseas how Aotearoa is looked to as a place that sets precedent and is influential, in terms of communities internationally looking to us. So I think it's really important for us to hold ourselves to that and to do everything we can to push this back. And submissions have just opened. They're open for, what is it, 60 days through to early July. John's chucked it in the chat, but he's on mute. Another 39 days. Thanks, John. But yeah, I think also, John, you've literally sent well over 100 emails in the last 72 hours. And I can just imagine, that took so much work. But if everyone listening to this episode did a tenth of that and sent 10 emails off to 10 different MPs, we hear constantly from, people who have been in that position or people who worked in MPs' offices, how much of a difference 5 emails can make. So I think our best chance of winning this is getting it shut down real tidily at that second reading. And the way to do that is to really put pressure on people in government, because even Nicola Grigg, who happily voted it through alongside the rest of her party, the speech that she gave for National was not one in support of the bill. You can tell they had really serious reservations. Um, so really leaning on those points and hammering in the fact that this is, I think, more than anything, National showing a huge amount of weakness. It's just giving one of their coalition partners another little present that's going to look shit for them. They haven't, I don't know that they've had a single win in that coalition this term. I think the only thing they've done is give things away.
I just be immediately betrayed by New Zealand First at the election. Well, what did you want to say, John?
Changing government in November can also kill this bill. So, there's immediate eyes on the prize here for this select committee, and being prepared to submit in person. Ignore Bob McCroskey and everyone else who submits, because we know what they're going to say. It's what they've said for about 45 years now, which is they're not really people, so they don't count as people. But also writing letters to the editor of your paper. So pitching comment pieces to go out there, because we know that they're coming. We know that the narrative is going to try and be set. So the more people that just 100 words saying, hey, this bill's really fucking stupid. Has everyone checked out how fucking stupid this bill is? Or in more polite language, will get you somewhere. There are so many organizations I have seen in the last 3 days who have put out really strong statements on social media. Share them on your Facebook so your mad auntie can see them. It may infuriate her, but also someone else will see it and go, yeah, that's fucking weird. There's a lot we can do, and there's a lot of work to be done. But for the old, decrepit people on this podcast, in our 30s and 40s, it's work we have done before and we've won. And when we got the BDMR through unanimous, great day. Conversion therapy ban, 100, like almost all people voted for it again. Great. Abortion law reform, great. Equal marriage, remember that? That was great. Like, you got to hold on to those. When we win this, it's going to feel really good. It's just going to fucking suck for about 6 months unless it gets killed before then. And I will hand over to Mia because I have done that thing again. Bye.
Thank you, Ally. Now, I just wanted to say another quick call to action that will feel really good. I think please show up to protests. I am in talks. It's early days yet, but I'm in talks with a few different queer organizers around the country, and we are doing what we can to organize events. Coming soon, hopefully, to a city near you. Please show up. Again, we want to make noise. We want to show politicians and also far-right fringe groups like Destiny Church that we are not afraid of them, that we're not going to back down, that we're going to keep fighting for our rights. And also, more importantly, if you're cis and you're listening to this, trans people are going to be at these protests. There's going to be the young trans youth, the people that I'm looking after. They're going to be at these protests and they're going to be afraid. They're going to be deeply, deeply anxious. And by showing out, you can support them. You can show them that people actually care about them, that there's something worth fighting for and living for, that there's hope for the future. And that is really vital to our community right now, especially, again, youth correspondent over here, and especially to our queer teens, our trans teens who are really going through it right now. Showing them that a better world is possible is so vital. And so please, if you can, even if nothing else, go up to the protests that happen in support of them, in support of our our final thing.
Exactly. John, do you want to close us out and thank everybody?
Thank you all for agreeing at very short notice to come on today.
And agreeing with you.
Thank you for all agreeing with me. It's so nice. It's so nice to be validated by women.
You're so valid.
But basically, there's going to be a lot of media over the next few weeks about this and months, and it may be very rare that you hear trans voices in that media, partly because the media deliberately excludes them from discussions about their own rights, but also because trans people putting themselves in a position where the mainstream media can attack them directly or, basically putting a spotlight on them is fucking terrifying and can result in some material harms being done to people. So One of 200 will continue to host as many trans voices as it can throughout this process. And we hope that other media work out ways to safely platform trans voices at a time when their rights are under attack. Join the Patreon, do all that other shit we said earlier, and thank you.